I think you made Jimmy Dore's brain hurt a little bit. No, that's not good. It's better than bad. It's good. All right. All right, count you in. 5, 4, 3.
Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm here in lockdown, mask mandatory Boulder Creek, California. Y'all, I don't usually have guests back right away after they've been on, but one, she's Whitney+Webb, and two, the article that we're about to dive into is something that I think everybody needs to be talking about. So with no further delay, please welcome back to the show the one and only Whitney+Webb. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Yeah,
right,
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, Jesus, dude, we had a nightmare trying to get connected through Skype, and as many problems as I have with Zoom, fuck it, let's make it work. You have in the Last American Vagabond an article that appeared yesterday, if I have that right. And it's titled Techno-Tyranny, How the U.S. National Security State is Using Coronavirus to Fulfill an Orwellian Vision. Let's fucking dive into this, because this is just wild. And there's so many overlapping people and so many implications about how it's going to impact us going forward. And basically, the way that I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the premise of what the National Security Center for AI is saying to people is, in order to beat China, we've got to become China.
I mean, it's sort of like that. Basically, what the whole premise of their approach is that they say that in order to dominate AI as a technology and have an advantage in AI in terms of national security for the defense community, intelligence community, and also for Silicon Valley, we have to dominate AI in what they say are like the 3 stages of the new life cycle of tech, or something like that. And so they say that currently the U.S. dominates or still has an advantage in the creation stage, but that China is surpassing us by far in the adoption stage of AI. And that means that we have to adopt, or in the U.S. would have to adopt AI much faster than China is. And China, of course, has adopted AI in ways that the U.S. has not. And by the way, this document that we're talking about is from last year, right? So well before the current crisis. So they basically say that AI has to be adopted, but there's all these obstacles they point out, including people in the US being wary of artificial intelligence because it will take jobs, it will violate privacy. And a lot of the technologies that they want, they see as necessary to adopt and necessary to dominate in this field are things that just Americans haven't really been interested in using thus far. Things like driverless cars, things of that nature, or AI AI-based like telemedicine. Last year, for a lot of Americans, that type of stuff was pretty unthinkable, right? But now in the age of coronavirus, it's a little different. In driverless cars, I think is a good example. Most people last year probably just remembered all these accidents of like that self-driving Uber, like running that woman over, or all those Tesla self-driving cars, just like self-immolating and running into poles and stuff, and now they're getting this huge PR push now with coronavirus, right? Of some driverless cars in California had their approval expedited. They didn't go through like the normal procedures because it was citing coronavirus as necessary. And one of the CEOs of one of these driverless car companies is saying, well, actually, this isn't a temporary shift because of the pandemic. This is permanent. And then he goes on to say stuff like humans are biohazards, machines are not. And this is honestly an idea that is being really heavily promoted in general across all these sectors right now, and is really going to be a key factor, I think, when they start talking about reopening the economy, because having too many people in contact, or going back to the way life was before. Humans are biohazards now, but machines are not. So that sort of creates an opportunity for all these, AI and robots and all of this stuff to creep into our lives in a way that it didn't exist before. And as I point out in my report, a lot of essentially the roadmap for this was basically laid out by this National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And there's a lot of overlap between that commission and Trump's new industry groups like Task Force to reopen the economy, that's advising the White House on reopening the economy.
Yeah, that's a wild ass list of psychopaths and sociopaths and billionaires and people the fucking worst, man. I think I sent that to Josh, but let me pull up on my own and just kind of read through some of this a little bit. We've got the CEOs from Cisco and Tyson Foods and Purdue Farms.
I mean, it's oligarchs, right? So there's an industry group. It's called the Great Economic Revival Industry Groups or something like that. And so there's a group for each sector.
Who are responsible for.
You're cutting out hell bad again.
Am I cutting out or is Steve cutting out?
No, Steve is.
Okay.
Hooray! Oh, you're coming in fine, Whitney.
All right.
Okay, so should I keep going then?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's all these. There's each like major sector of the U.S. economy has its own like task force economic revival group, right? And they're all like the oligarchs of that particular sector, and as an example, you have like Sheldon Adelson on top of like hospitality because he's like a casino magnate, right? And then you have the cruise lines and all this stuff, and then you have there's pretty much every major Trump donor is on there. Sheldon Adelson, Bernard Marcus. You also have Paul Singer, which is kind of ironic he's there because he's the guy that's been like outsourcing, paying money to like outsource a lot of high-paying tech jobs to other countries, specifically one country. So kind of odd that he'd be on there, huh? But also Jeff Bezos, right? Who's been talking about for years implementing AI and robots in Amazon warehouses and stuff, right? So
not only that, but it's got all of the defense contractors, like the top 5 or top 6 defense contractors, and General Dynamics, who makes robots that can open doors and shoot guns. And this is the task force that's going to usher us back into our new way of life, our post-pandemic society, and a society that includes, per your article, a transition to a cashless society, kind of a phase out of private ownership of vehicles, and through a centralized rideshare network, which sounds horrific to me.
It's basically I obviously don't like it because it's not just phasing out individual car ownership. It's moving to fleet ownership of driverless cars that are managed by companies like Uber and that type of ride sharing. And basically, you have like today, you have like a car and you just get in and you can go where you want, but obviously this will limit what types of areas you're allowed to go to based on where the scope of the ride sharing network, travels, right? So it has the potential for, to really limit human movement and restrict human movement, right? So it's definitely concerning, I would say. And the driverless car aspect has not really been talked about enough, but we're seeing a push for this, like I said, because of the coronavirus, everything that's going on right now. But there's a lot of other things that they flag, like you mentioned. They talk about phasing out cash, but also credit cards, moving to smartphone mobile payments only. They talk about ending in-person shopping, going to basically everyone buys everything online. And there's a quote in this document from last year that says, when going shopping online is literally the only way to get what you want, consumers go online. can't see that. And now there's basically this push to have it be that way. And there's a lot of, like I said, if you look through the media reports talking about these new technologies being implemented across the board, they say this is not a fleeting shift, this is a permanent shift, and this will stay long after coronavirus is gone. This is the new normal, right?
Yeah, there's a quote that, and I can't remember if it came from the NSCAI presentation or if it was in the other document. Carpeted with cameras is good infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, this is about using collecting pictures of people and their faces and training AI on it, like using training AI that analyzes faces for facial recognition purposes or image recognition, also biometrics and all of that stuff. I mean, it's all about that. They say that using that data is a killer way to train AI. They call it, that's what they say. And they basically say that the government needs to be more involved by mandating more cameras like that being installed, and then making those databases available to private companies to train AI on that data. And at one point, they even talk about how it might be a good idea in the future, a logical next step, to create DNA databases of every citizen for AI to be analyzed, which is like, whoa, slow down a bit, Silicon Valley and CIA and Pentagon. By the way, I didn't point that out, but the National Security Commission on AI is not just Silicon Valley, right? It's Silicon Valley plus In-Q-Tel and the CIA and the intelligence community, plus the Pentagon, and then there's a former Lockheed Martin director on there. So like military industrial complex.
And also Eric Schmidt.
He's the chair. Yeah, he chairs it. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I mean, if you created a rogues gallery of the most evil fucking people on the planet, they would all be on this national security fusion, which sounds like the worst possible type of jazz you could ever play. But in fact, it's just an Orwellian fucking system that phases out private ownership of cars, moves to cashless and credit cardless society. They call it legacy systems, right? Like that's the barrier, and one of those barriers is us not wanting to transition from a cashless society or to a cashless society. And there's this weird concern that some Americans have about completely giving over their privacy to corporations and the government, and they want to completely do away with that.
Yeah, they do. Another thing they refer to as like legacy systems are like things like FDA approval, and not that the FDA is like great, they've approved a lot of shit they should never have approved, like aspartame and stuff like that. But, the idea that there should be no process at all to see if something that's being marketed for health purposes is safe or even helpful, they're saying like, no, we don't need that. That gets in the way, because what we had to do is make everyone use this stuff so that we can beat China, basically.
The push for over all phases of the military was one of the original excuses for Space Force. And this seems like, with the cast of characters they have involved in it, it seems like asymmetrical warfare is what they're, basing the transition to this new society on. And the argument that we're not going to become China because we're capitalists or we're Americans or what is completely thrown out the fucking window by this document that you've shown one of the screenshots throughout your report.
Right. Well, remember like the Clinton email, or it was the Hillary Clinton speeches where she was like, I have a public and a private position. I mean, that's not just Hillary Clinton. That's like the whole fucking government that does that, And so you have all these politicians coming out and saying stuff like China's mass surveillance system is so bad, and it's all about it's all about control and demanding obedience to the the ruling party of China. okay, well, I mean, mass surveillance in the US would like do the same thing, but they're, you know, it's fine here, but it's bad there. I mean, that doesn't make any logical sense. I mean, basically this is all public rhetoric to get people to consent to this stuff. And so they're, you know, marketing it based on what we're most afraid of at the time. I mean, there have over the years been pushes for increased mass surveillance, and they tack the justification for the expansion of mass surveillance to whatever Americans are currently most afraid of. Last fall, it was mass shootings. Now it's coronavirus. And before all of this, you know, it was like terrorism, right? The war on terror, right? So we had to give up our rights. We had to be more surveilled. There had to be a bigger domestic spying apparatus than ever before because we had to stop the terrorists. Okay, but that didn't work, right? So, you know, oh, we have to stop the mass shooters before they strike, and, you know, pre-crime and all this stuff that came out last year. And now it's, oh, for your health, you know. I'm sure, you know, if that, I mean, they're basically looking for whatever sticks. If this isn't sick, they'll be like, it's for the children, it's for the planet, it's for the puppies. I mean, I don't know. They're just looking for whatever they think will work at the time, honestly.
The Earn It or Earn IT Act, however you want to say it, is rooted in this is for the children. We've got to set up an arbitrary series of you know, good behavior rules that will let some people use encrypted software, but most people can't use encrypted software because they're not going to meet this arbitrary set of rules, and we're doing it to protect the children. I don't know how. Are you familiar with the Earn It Act?
I didn't report on it.
Now my internet's okay. My fucking internet, dude.
It's coming in. Okay.
Okay.
It's a little better now.
Okay, good, because it's telling me it's unstable. Maybe it's telling me I'm unstable. I don't know. This article has me fucking spitting nails. It really does. Let me check my notes here. Oh, yeah. Data is the new oil. Let's talk about that for a minute, because that was a monster quote in your article.
Yeah, so that was something that the CEO of In-Q-Tel said like a year or two ago. Chris Darby, he's on this National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. But it's not just him that says this, by the way. It appears to have started with an Economist article in 2017 and then got a lot of promotion in media and like by think tanks and like panel discussions and all this stuff. People really like saying this phrase over and over again. Data is the new oil. And I think it's really interesting, and I tweeted this out a little bit ago, I think it's really interesting that we're seeing these ridiculous collapses in the oil market, like it goes to like negative prices and stuff, but at the same time we're seeing like this huge push to adopt these coronavirus like tracking apps and all this stuff on your smartphone, you know, and things like that is going to just harvest a huge amount of data, right? So they've been saying this for a long time because they say that in terms of what will enrich the next, you know, oligarch class, like oil made, you know, the first billionaire, like J.D. Rockefeller and all that stuff. And that class, you know, 100 years ago or so, that in the next 100 years or so, it will be the people that own your data. Right. So
this is the fourth industrial revolution that you allude to, or do I have that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another one of these terms these think tanks and stuff throw around. The person that is honestly, in my opinion, the best writer and researcher about that is Corey Morningstar. You should definitely check out her work.
I agree.
No,
she's on it. I've been trying to get her on the show, and she's interview shy.
But she's great. So check out her written work, even if she doesn't do interviews. But basically, the fourth industrial revolution is this industrial revolution that will be led by AI, 5G, nanotechnology, biotechnology. I mean, just basically like, you know, Borg technology, basically, I mean, is what they're pushing. It's really messed up. But basically, the takeaway from this, right, is that there's going to be a huge push towards robots in the workforce and AI micromanaging people's lives and basically using this stuff as a way to control people. Now that we have more people than ever in the US unemployed, right? I mean, and we have all these billionaires on the economy. These billionaires do not want people empowered. They do not want them independent. What they want is to maintain their control at the very top. They do not want to, share it with a class that's demanding more rights. They want us dependent on like $1,200 every 10 weeks, barely getting by, and basically being in this, fragile state where we basically take whatever scraps they give to us, right? And I think we're already seeing that to an extent, and that, a lot of these same people on this task force, like Jeff Bezos, for example, have already talked about replacing human workers with robots and things like that. So what is that going to mean for the rest of us? Well, I don't know if I really trust them to have our best interests at heart. Like I said, I mean, these guys are like ruthless. You don't get to be one of these like billionaires like being nice to people. And I think it's kind of absurd, honestly, that these billionaires who like crack open heads their entire business careers, all of a sudden they set up a charitable foundation and they're like, oh, they're so nice now, and they clearly want to help everyone, like people say about Bill Gates and stuff. I think it's just honestly kind of silly. But this whole AI revolution, they have known about this for a long time and they've wanted to implement it, because remember, decades ago, they outsourced a lot of most of American industry to China, and they did that because labor in China or in other countries in Asia or other parts of the world, they didn't have to pay as much. It was a much cheaper labor pool, right? Yeah, but what's even cheaper than that? It's robots, because you don't have to pay them at all. and that's where this is heading, and that's what this is about.
Do you think, and I'm going to ask you to speculate, do you think that this is a segue to a transhumanist society? Do you think there's a push for that, like in the background along with all of this?
Well, I think a lot of these people at the top are really into that. I mean, if you look at someone, I've written a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and all of that stuff. I mean, he was really tight with all these elite scientists and a lot of, big name celebrities and all these people. And he was really into transhumanism. Apparently a lot of people around him were into that too. We know that a lot of people connected to Google, what's his name, like Ray Kurzweil and all this stuff, are like super enthusiastic about transhumanism. And there's a lot of promotion for that. There's like people like Elon Musk, who's on this freaking Donald Trump task force, also, who has his Neuralink thing. He wants to put like chips in people's brains. But it's not just, people like Elon Musk, who a lot of people honestly think is kind of crazy, but it's people like DARPA, which is the Pentagon's research arm. I mean, they right now have been researching for the past couple of years how to erase and write memories directly on the human brain using a combination of nanotechnology and like stuff like inserted into your skull. I mean, why are they looking into that stuff? I think it's pretty weird, but I honestly think it's part of this long-term agenda about control and trying to keep the powers that be from ever losing control if people at some point rise up and demand more of their rights or a bigger share of the pie, or what have you. I mean, these billionaires and the deep state or whatever, the powers that be, however you want to talk about them, they know that at some point the current system, at least before coronavirus, was unsustainable, that a lot of people were starting to wake up to that and starting to want something different. Less and less people are buying into the two-party paradigm. And at some point there was going to be, an inflection point where, their grip on power may have slipped. So obviously they don't want that. And they've, been thinking about what can we do, right? And they've definitely been doing some really creepy research projects that sort of suggest that that's where they want to take things, at least from DARPA's perspective. They definitely want to implement this with U.S. soldiers. And I think part of that has to do with the idea of preventing the enforcement arm of the state, the military, from refusing orders, among other things.
My buddy Jason Burmis did an excellent series of oh shit, how can I do this? Never mind. He did an excellent video on I think it came out at DARPA, but it was basically explaining the super soldier program that they were trying to establish, and that had a lot to do with enhanced biometrics. But their big selling point in this report was not, we're doing this because we need super soldiers. Their big thing was, how do we market this to the public at large so that they can get comfortable with the fact that, oh yeah, and we also have a fucking universal soldier over there. We've got Jean-Claude Van Damme with the Neuralink, and he's going to kick ass for America, but it's selling it to the public that needs to happen, because that's where the bulk of the revenue is.
Right. I mean, I guess it's one way of looking at it. I mean, from my perspective, this is all about centralizing control in, the hands of the intelligence community, the defense community, and the oligarch class, which really, I mean, so I sort of mentioned earlier that there were these three distinct groups on this commission that I write about in this article, the intelligence community, the Pentagon, and Silicon Valley, but really the lines between them are like really non-existent at this point. I mean, In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm, did like a bunch of was an early investor in Google and Palantir and a bunch of other Silicon Valley companies, right? The DoD and the intelligence community joined forces, creating a joint task force on AI specifically. So all of the AI stuff that the intelligence community does is coordinated with the Pentagon and vice versa, right? And then a lot of these Silicon Valley companies are contractors for the intelligence community and also the military, right? So, I mean, it's basically just like a blob that, transcends, the national security state and the private sector. And I just want to point out, these are not trustworthy individuals. Silicon Valley lies all the time about, oh, well, no, we're actually respecting your data when they're actually not, And they say, oh, well, our partnership with the government on this project isn't bad, but it really is. And then obviously, trusting anything the intelligence community says when you have their former director going, oh, yeah, we lie, cheat, and steal and have workshops on it. And that's what we do. It's just kind of wild to trust these guys.
It's a homogenous chunk of fascism that has a ridiculous amount of control, not only over our data or our privacy, but also every single rule and law we have to abide by. And when those things come together to sort of vomit this fascism all over us, my natural inclination is to stand up to that, to protest that, to try and do whatever I can to stop it. But I mean, even when people like Jimmy Dore are like, what's wrong with centralization? It raises some serious red flags to me, the idea of government.
Right. Well, I mean, so for people on the left that like want, that are looking at this about like, oh, well, centralized planning is good. I mean, think about the government and the US the way it is now. Would you give that government any money right now? I mean, I would not, I would not give them more power. I mean, look what they've done and look what they're doing. And to basically think that they won't abuse a mass surveillance system or anything like that for their purposes, I think is just super naive, especially when you consider that they're now looking for the right to indefinitely detain people without trial, something that they were trying to get last year as well because of mass shootings. We had the indefinitely detained mass shooters before they strike. Well, now it's back because of coronavirus. It's like all these things they've been wanting to do this whole time that originally were fielded first after 9/11 to be used on, foreign nationals and people abroad, indefinite detainment, disappearing them to black sites, surveilling their phone calls. It was all supposed to be about the foreign threat, right? And now it's all being brought home domestically. And I would argue this has always been the plan. It was tested out and see if they accept it on a foreign population, and then we'll bring it home. Because whether it's, for the national security state, I mean, the people in the U.S. are the enemy too, to them. Anyone that wants to challenge their power or want, would dissent or would get in the way and won't give them, the obedience they want is a threat to them. And that's how and that because of things like continuity of government planning, Main Core, and all this stuff that I wrote about a few weeks ago. I mean, that tells you straight up that they are not interested in having anyone that would dissent for any reason. I mean, people on Main Core, you can be put on that list if you haven't paid your taxes, if you've attended any protest ever. I mean, they straight up say for the most trivial reasons you can end up on there, you know. And now they have everything you've said on social media and all of this stuff. It's so naive to think they want to abuse it.
And look, man, I mean, I've been on a handful of lists throughout my entire adult life, but there is no doubt in my mind that, you know, everyone involved in Action for Assange will wind up on that main core list, because we went directly to Washington, D.C. and held an entire week of protests in front of the White House and the Washington Post and a bunch of other significant locations, as well as Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond's jail. Like, we went out and raised hell in front of that place. So there's, yeah, I mean, if they decide to use a Plan Demick as cover for rounding up dissidents, I'm glad it's really hard to get to my house.
Yeah, well, you know, speaking of that, I mean, I was just really freaked out when there was that MSNBC, well, it was on Rachel Maddow's show. She was interviewing some guy from the New York Times, and the guy was like, well, now that we have quarantined, the real work begins. And she was talking about, yeah, we got to send people, take them out of their houses, and, you know, these she called them temporary hospitals for people with mild symptoms. That doesn't make a lot of sense, to drag people with mild symptoms, which, you know, for coronavirus, it could be like a very slight fever. You could like have a runny nose or be sneezy, and like have people like these snitch hotlines they're setting up to be like, you know, they're not social distancing, or this person could have coronavirus and they're not going to get tested and all this stuff. I mean, they're just like opening. I really think they're testing the waters still. And I think a big part of that, the reason I think they're still testing the waters is because there hasn't been a huge purge on social media yet, but I think that shit is coming really soon.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Because we're starting to see not just the usual pockets of, you know, pushback from, you know, the more anarchist left or the more libertarian right. We're also starting to, I just got a super chat from Zane Griffin. He says, average people I know who don't follow this stuff are questioning Bill Gates and the official narrative. And he feels like a breaking point is coming. I feel like that's when they're really going to clamp down on social media. At the onset of the coronavirus, they were banning the coronavirus so they could sort out who was following the narrative and who was speaking outside of it. And that was around the same time they banned Zero Hedge from Twitter. And regardless of their sudden jump to, you know, kind of trashing everyone on global research and being, you know, pretty anti-China and following that line, I thought they had done some good work. I don't think they deserve to get banned, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I think we're at a point where the deplatforming is much more likely now, because not only are we seeing these reports in mainstream media like, poor Bill Gates, he's being attacked by online mobs that don't see him as our great benefactor. And, oh no, Marina Abramovich was accused of as conspiracy theories and all this stuff. You know, these people that are being sort of called out for stuff on social media are now getting like sympathy pieces in mainstream media. And not only that, but apparently, from what I've seen anyway, that there's been these like postings of passwords for the Gates Foundation and like all the World Health Organization come out. And so, I mean, WikiLeaks isn't really doing that stuff right now, but apparently people are trying to do something similar. I don't really know what's going on there, so I don't want to really comment anymore. But I mean, if that ends up turning into something, I think they will try and clamp down to keep any information that's, you know, really revelatory that comes out of that, if any does. I mean, it remains to be seen, obviously, but they'll clamp down on that fast. I don't think they want a repeat of what's going on now with what happened with the 2016 election and the Clinton emails or anything like that. I think they would, you know, do the limited internet shutdowns they talked about at Event 201 last year. We have to control the flow of information, limited internet shutdowns when things get out of hand. I think that could definitely happen.
I had a guy on a couple of weeks ago to try to ask him about like alternative internet solutions, because you can't really turn off the internet that floats around. You can just limit who gets to see what. So we had a good talk about mesh networks, and he was also like, dude, just go low tech. you know, do you remember Occupy? Do you remember how towns would get flyered with information? Do you remember how this would, you know, and blah blah? And I'm for that. I think we're gonna have to do both. I think if there's the ability to build a mesh network cheaply to do that, and that can be as simple as like going to the dump and grabbing a satellite. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can make a mesh network work. That's a clunky sentence. I'm never going to write that. Sorry, I don't have much of a filter, so you get all.
Hey, it's okay. That's why I like coming on your show.
I appreciate that, man. I do.
That's why I come back.
I've been told I give decent interview. Before we wrap, because I got to get my ass to studying up for the Free Assange vigil tonight. I want to ask you, like, aside from just sharing this information with the people that we know and the people that we maybe don't know, like, what can people do to kind of combat all of this crazy, gross, gnarly shit?
Okay, so relevant to the discussion we've been having in this whole data is the new oil bit. They want control over your data. Stop giving it to them. I think would be the way to go there. Try and divest from smartphones and some of these apps that you don't need and you don't use. A lot of these things feed all of your private information. They have access to your camera, things like that. I mean, honestly, I would just recommend getting rid of the smartphone entirely. If you're stuck in quarantine in your house, you have a computer, you don't really need your phone too, right? And I honestly do, though, think it's kind of naive to think the government can't break encryption and can't get into your stuff. So I think we should honestly just like discard those illusions, I guess, of privacy at this point, because I mean, it's really extensive, the type of the ways they can get into stuff. But I mean, if you don't want to feed into this new system, then stop giving away your data, you know, willy-nilly. I think there really needs to be a coordinated push by people that consume alt media to sign up for different platforms that are not owned by these Silicon Valley companies that want to turn the whole world really into like this creepy control grid, you know, dystopia, and what I call in the piece, you know, like a techno tyranny, techno fascism. The way to avoid that is to divest from that stuff and do it as fast as possible, and think of ways to construct, you know, economic networks and you know, be able to sustain your needs as much as possible without using that. Whether that's like gardening and growing your own food or something. I mean, any of that stuff. I think if you're stuck at home in quarantine, maybe learn a new skill and learn how to grow some vegetables or something, or, you know, I mean, maybe people don't want to do that. I don't know, but definitely like spend time trying to think about how, you know, if this agenda ends up advancing even more than it is now and you don't want to be a part of it, what are you going to do about it? Start thinking about that now.
Yeah, I make a point to tell the folks that watch the show, like, one of the more revolutionary things you can do is do everything dependent we are on international supply lines. The less dependent we are on a centralized government, the less dependent we are on you know, federal regulations on how our food gets here, the better off we will be. If that means going meatless, like, I'll grudgingly do that, but at this point I don't have to yet, because we've still got, you know, I mean, where I am, you can get to complete and total farm country in less than an hour. It's the cool supply line, because we're not importing a lot of food. It's the next fucking county. Like, you can make that happen. Whitney, thank you so much. I do. I love it when you come on the show. Please come back when the next couple of parts of your series come out. And yeah, in case anybody's living under a rock, let them know where they can find you.
You can find my work right now at thelastAmericanVagabond.com. You can also follow me on Twitter or Mastodon or Gab. I have all those accounts on there too. But on Twitter, I'm _Whitney+Webb, and on the other two, I'm just Whitney+Webb, no spaces.
Hell yeah. Well, that's gonna do it for episode of Slow News Day. I will be back at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for the Free Assange Vigil. It is going to be fucking incredible. Our guests tonight are Ray McGovern and Elizabeth Voss. We're going to break down exactly what special administrative measures are and what they mean as it specifically pertains to the case against Julian Assange if he gets extradited here. Do not miss that. I am on Rockfin now. You can go, and if you endorse me, for $10 a month, you get access to a number of other creators, including Jason Burmis, Ron Placone, Graham Elwood. Sam Tripoli is going to be joining the Rockfin here soon. Yeah, shit, this has been wild. I always feel like I've done a rail of coke when I've talked to Whitney. There's like mind's fucking spinning. I don't want to go start a new business, but I am thinking a lot. Look, man, that's like 4 o'clock in the morning for everybody that's done coke a little bit too. We should go into business together. It's like one of the anywho. This has been Slow News Day. I'm Steve Poikinen. Good luck.